Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for making time to be with us here today. I'm Audra Mitchell, head of the Massy Learning Institute, and your host for today's session entitled 1 Year Later, the Future of Work. So why this topic and why now? Well, April the 30th, 2021 marked the 1-year anniversary of MLI hosting our webinar Wednesdays. Woo! And we thought it fitting, therefore, to go back to our first topic from 2020, the future of work, to examine 1 year later what has transpired. There is no doubt the world has changed. The unprecedented socio-economic challenges of 2020 and 2021 demand that we as leaders and individuals reimagine the future and take meaningful action to transform our mental models to adapt and quickly embrace this new reality. Before I introduce and welcome our presenter, let me share some brief housekeeping tips regarding our flow for today. At the end of the presentation, we will have a moderated Q&A session, and you will be invited to post your questions and comments in the chat box during the presentation. If someone posts a question you wanted to ask, just click the thumbs up icon by that question, as this will help us in moderating your questions given the limited time frame. Additionally, a recording of the webinar will be made available to all attendees, so please look out for it. Without further ado, let me welcome back and introduce our presenter, former CEO of Massy Technologies Infocom, and now Regional CEO of PBS Technologies, Mr. Ian John. Ian has over 20 years senior managerial experience in the ICT sector with a proven track record of success. He holds an MBA with distinction from Anglia Ruskin University, a business degree from the University of Oxford Brookes, and a postgraduate diploma in strategic business IT from the University of Portsmouth, UK. Ian holds many other certifications and was trained by Singapore Corporation in e-government strategies and ICT. Here's another interesting fact. Additionally, Ian considers himself a technological futurist with specific interests in attempting to systematically explore predictions and possibilities about the future and how they can emerge from the present to impact our peoples, communities, societies, and ultimately our way of life. He believes in bringing solutions to market that deliver a better customer experience whilst improving efficiency and ultimately driving growth for businesses and countries. Ian, it is indeed a pleasure to have you back with us 1 year later as you share with us some of the changes that have taken place over the past year and provide us with some tips as we continue to navigate this very unprecedented situation. Ian, welcome, and I now hand over to you.
Thank you, Audra, and good morning to all on this session this morning. It's good to be back 1 year later. And last year we spoke about the future of work. Many of what we shared at that time would have felt as if it was far-fetched, but we would all have to agree that what we've seen during the last 12 months has been unprecedented. Let me take the opportunity to congratulate the entire MLI staff for 1 year of success. And this is no easy task. I can tell you I have known of many initiatives that started last year, but for some reason were not able to withstand the challenges of the pandemic. So I really want to say congratulations to Audra and Dawn and Rennie and Susanna, all of the team members who have kept MLI going. It's very important, more so than ever, sharing the ideas, collaborating and really learning in this unprecedented time. So allow me to this morning share with you a number of um, topics that I think would be of interest, and it's going to be a discussion. We are going to look at how and why we need to reimagine the future. What is happening and happening at such a rapid pace that is causing disruption and causing uh, challenges for businesses, and not only businesses, but individuals and organizations and nations. And we're going to talk about that this morning. So I want to invite you to expand your mind. This morning, all of us, we all need to be futurists. We all need to systematically understand what are the changes that are happening in the future so that we can orchestrate, recalibrate, and seize those opportunities. So I'm going to share with you a couple slides in no order this morning, but I see this slide as one of my favorite slides. It really presents to you 2,000 years of economic history, and it puts it in a graphical visual so that you can understand, when we talk about the unprecedented changes that were brought about by all of the industrial revolutions, we understand what is the underpinning and why is this so crucial? Why is this so important for us as leaders in our families, in our homes, to understand the impact and what we must do to lead? And we all are leaders. Firstly, we must lead ourselves. And then we have others. If we're not leaders within the organization or at home, we are all leaders in ourselves. So when we look at this chart, what we're seeing is an unprecedented amount of economic growth. Now, I want to point out to you that up until the 1700s, much of the economic activity, and you would see those countries with vast amount of lands were really the countries that were leading. And we are talking about back then the way in which wealth was generated, agriculture. So basically, much of the world would have been agrarian in the period up until the 1700s. And then something happened around 1760 or thereabouts, 1760, and we began to see the first industrial revolution. And suddenly you begin to see an increase in and a change in the shape of the economic activity. And that would have continued until 1870 thereabouts, until we had the second industrial revolution. And so you see there is a marked distinction in terms of the increase. So one of the countries that have been on the rise throughout these periods of time has been the United States of America, but with it, all of the other Western countries, so France and Italy and Germany, Japan, some of the Asian countries, and now we have India and China really expanding their economic growth. What I want you to think about is civilization. So we are getting the context this morning in terms of why things are changing. Think about civilization and think about the families. Think about the way in which they earned a living. Think about their livelihood. Think about when these new ways of driving economic activities became mainstream. Think about the disruption, the heartache, the shift in the economic model that impacted both industries, nations, and also impacted, more importantly, individuals and families. And so why is this important is that, I go back to two of my most famous sayings. One from King Solomon, you must have heard me say it before because I repeat it all the time. That which has been will be, and that which has been done will be done again. And Ecclesiastes, for those of you who are Bible readers, He says, there is nothing new under the sun. And he's right. When you look at the economic history, what you're seeing is at the heart of all of these industrial revolutions, which are driven by technological advancement, is people. And what is happening is change. Business models, economic models, the way you earn, the way you work, the way you socialize. Whenever there is a new advancement or collision in technology and it brings about an inflection point, there is huge change. And so I urge you, as a futurist, to go back and read history and understand history, because you know the saying, those who do not understand their history or refuse to take regard of history are bound to repeat the missteps of the past. It's one of my favorite sayings, which says, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. And what we're seeing is unprecedented change because we are entering into a new industrial age, which is the fourth industrial revolution. So I'm taking it slow because I want us to really get the context and understand. Many of us think the pandemic may be one of the main reasons for why things are changing so rapid. And you are right. It is the catalyst. It is the launching pad. And it is happening at a much faster rate than anticipated. But there's another change that is happening. It's an orchestrated plan called the Great Reset. And I'll share a little bit about the Great Reset with you this morning. So I think you may not have expected that you would come and we would discuss history this morning, but history is very important and economics is very important. They're both at the heart of planning, and they're both very important to the person who is trying to understand and map out a future. And it could be just a career, or it could be a business strategy for your department or your business or your organization. How will we be relevant in the future? So look at the same data from this slide, only this time we've put it on a line graph. And we show you GDP, world GDP, and we put it against time. So remember we said that that first industrial revolution was somewhere around 1760. First industrial revolution, here comes the second industrial revolution around 1870. Here comes third industrial revolution around 1964. And look at what happens with the fourth industrial revolution, which occurred and began just around 2000 to 2008. We've had unprecedented exponential growth in world GDP. Now, bear in mind that this exponential growth in world GDP is also correlated to the fact that the world had 2.1 billion people in the years 1961 to 65, thereabouts, 2.1 billion people. And since then, we now have a population explosion. And today on the planet, we have 7.6 billion people. So when we look at 7.6 billion people, what do we see as business people or as individuals? We see opportunities. Basic premise of any successful business is the more persons you can serve, the more likely your business success is going to be. Larger markets, scale of economies of scales. So in essence, the goal and opportunity for us in all of these countries that we represent is going to be, how can we serve more? And in serving more, we have to find a way to be able to serve more. We'll discuss that just a little bit. But the correlation here is that wealth is tied, and the generation of wealth is tied to technological advancement. Now, let's think about these four industrial revolutions. So shift to mechanized steam power brought a lot of industries. And then we had mass production assembly, and we had electrical energy for the first time, which saw an explosion again in efficiencies and productions. And then Industry 3.0, which we may be familiar with, dealt with the era of the computer, the microchip, the desktop computer, and all of the software that came along with it. So we remember Bill Gates and IBM and the early pioneers of the microcomputer in the 80s, Steve Jobs with Apple, which has heralded much of the advancement. Some of you can remember when there was a period of time in business where a computer was a novelty back in the 80s, and now a computer can be found in almost every home in some of the countries that we reside in. So this is an explosion, exponential. And we are now at an age where we are saying wealth and economic activity will be created exponentially by this new technology, Industry 4.0. But what makes Industry 4.0 very different? I'm going to just skip ahead to this particular slide. Is when we look at Industry 1, 2, 3, we call it the old era. Industry 4.0 now integrates biological, digital, and the physical. And all of these are integrated into systems that are now bringing about exponential growth, an exponential change. So we have seen an acceleration of the fusion of technologies in the past year, and we've seen where wealth and an explosion in wealth in some quarters has been exponential in the past year, and we're going to examine a few of those today. Now, I want you to prepare some questions because we can really have a discussion around how your company, your business, or even your personal future would be impacted. So let's take a run through in terms of what has happened in the past year. Pre-pandemic, the World Economic Forum talked about 35% of skills would be disrupted. By 2030, 400 to 800 million workers will be displaced, and the countries have all been identified, and this was pre-pandemic. We've since had a revised position on this, and since the beginning of the pandemic, there has been an acceleration. So now we're seeing a disruption of 2 times in employee skills. So almost 50% of our employees need reskilling by 2025. And this is one of the key points I wanted to share with you this morning. At the heart of the transformation that is needed is about people. It's not the technology that is at the heart of it. What we need to do as individuals is we need to take collective responsibility. And we now need to accelerate that more than ever. The last year we've seen the retail industry, physical brick and mortar stores in the first world countries, in the developed world countries, they have shuttered thousands of retail outlets. Now retail sales have rebounded to pre-pandemic levels and are now surpassing pre-pandemic levels. But it's doing that not because brick and mortar stores are now going back to normal sales levels. It's doing it because of online transactions, online sales, which has increased markedly. So I urge you to spend some time as leaders and take a look at the changes and the change in the job landscape. So when we talk about the future of work, what are some of the growing demand and what are some of the decreasing demand for jobs? The types of jobs and what is driving these changes is really automation. Automation in systems, we talk about the fusion of systems, fusion of the physical and the digital and the biological. Not necessarily robots, but automation and programming within applications and integration within different disciplines within the organizations. So we've seen huge disruption in data entry and administrative and secretarial staff in the last 12 months, bookkeeping as well, payroll, accountants, auditors. The auditing function has been disrupted because a series of applications that are robotics have also dominated those fields of work. So I urge you to spend a lot of time in looking and understanding which area might be disrupted and if that will impact you so that you can begin to look at the future. So in essence, there's a quick transformation that has to be done. In all aspects, we have to look at the business and look at how the technology is impacting the business. And we have to begin planning and investing into the future. These are just some of the data scientists. This is an 11-year-old data scientist out of Jamaica in the last 12 months who has topped the world. So I share this with you because these are some of the areas that are going to be high demand: data, mathematics, science, physics. Those are the types of fields that are going to be in high demand in the next several years from now into the foreseeable future. And simply this is to show that there's a deep dive that needs to be done by businesses in understanding their markets, in understanding the technology, in understanding their education and their training methodology, and ensuring that they are relevant and they are relevant to this new economic model. It's a framework which I would recommend that each and every one of you pay attention to. So normal, no more, we agree. During the pandemic, Apple was a $1 trillion company, and during the pandemic, they achieved $2 trillion in market capitalization during the pandemic. Countries employed some of the most advanced robots during the pandemic to boost up efficiency, obviously mitigating the risk against the spread of the pandemic. And this is likely to increase over the coming years. So again, a disruption to production staff, factories, and all of those types of jobs. I mentioned this before, US retail returned to pre-pandemic trajectory. Good news, not so good news, because the shift was really to online retail. And even during the lockdown at this point in time, you're seeing where many people are moving to some form of e-commerce, be it partial e-commerce or full back-end e-commerce. I want to share this with you because this is about planning, and this is about really understanding the future. And we see the US billionaire wealth surges during the pandemic. Extreme wealth has been created during the pandemic. And what is the common theme with all of these billionaires? Their huge investment in digital, their huge investment in technology that is paying off. Jeff Bezos with all of his online business, Bill Gates, again, Mark Zuckerberg, all investing heavily, Warren Buffett, in tech. And this is key if we ought to generate the type of wealth for our countries. Again, every single one of these billionaires are in the tech space, and they've all seen astronomical, exponential growth in their wealth and their business. And these increases, by the way, are just during the pandemic. So what it's telling us is that the world has changed. And we are in the midst of Industry 4.0, and Industry 4.0 is taking no prisoners. So we know those who have been on the short end. And so we see that countries where there isn't the penetration of the internet or where the digital ICT penetration is not at the level that it should be, has really impacted. And we all know of families who have been impacted because they've not been able to reach. And this is a sad story that is also prevalent throughout the Caribbean, Latin America. So the world's largest online marketplaces have all seen a spike as well. And the million-dollar question for us in the Caribbean and some of the other countries is, can we produce and create unique products and services that we can sell, and we can tap into this growth in economic activity that is now being exploited on the platforms of digital. This is just a breakdown of some of the other products that are growing fast in the sectors online and projected to grow. And I think some of our countries have a chance at food, maybe furniture, maybe beauty care, maybe even apparel, the fashion industry. But certainly, if we are not producing, if we are not developing the skills, if we are not focusing on the data and understanding where the growth is for economic activity, we run the risk of becoming obsolete or irrelevant, as we say. So I put this one because this can be an entire discussion that we can talk about later on, which really talks about the disruption in the green economy. There's one video that I would want to share with you, which will really share a lot about the Great Reset and what is the agenda by the World Economic Forum and the world elites and the world leaders for saving the planet and for changing the way we live, the way we operate, the way we communicate, socialize. So the message this morning, obviously, is that normal no more, and the world we know has changed. We now need to understand what that change is about. How will it impact us? And how can we reimagine our future and take meaningful action to ensure that we are relevant? By the way, we don't have 10 years to do this. We don't have 5 years. We need to do this now because this is the reality. This is the world that we live in. I want to invite you to send some of your questions. Really, this is a summary in the period of time that we have.
So I see we have a question in the chat, but I certainly would like to ask, you spoke about the Great Reset, and I know you were trying to share the video on it. Can you just share a little bit about that in summary, what that is?
So the Great Reset really is a position that has been put forward by the World Economic Forum and world leaders, in that our planet, as it is right now, is in a state of unsustainability. As I mentioned, we have 7.6 billion people on the planet. So just think about the amount of food that we must produce to feed 7.6 billion people. And think about the amount of clothing, the amount of cars, the amount of fossil fuel that must be generated to keep the planet going. And so you must be following the Green New Deal by President Joe Biden and the world leaders in the climate conference that was held with all of the G20 countries. And in that, all of these countries have committed to cut carbon emission in half by 2030. That's just 9 years away. So you're talking about a drastic change that will take place on planet Earth. All of the cars that we drive will be electric vehicles by the year 2025. So there's a change in the way that we live as well, and the way we consume. Food is another area that is a great contributor to carbon emissions. So there is an agenda to reduce the amount of meat consumed by the planet. And the way they do that is by reducing the amount of red meat, cattle, farms, because I don't know if you're aware, but cows do emit quite a bit of methane, right? And so this agenda really forces countries to relook their consumption model, but also their output, their production, their exports. The reset also commits to reducing fossil fuel to the past, and proposed is a tax, a penalty to countries that consume fossil fuel, produce fossil fuel. So just think about those economies that are oil and gas based. If the world says that you are now one of the top polluters, your trade balance will be affected by it. You will pay a price. And it may be that you may have to pay a carbon tax to clean up the planet with high penalties. So if you have a huge workforce, a huge level of your labor market that is in the industry of energy, you need to begin to plan. and invest in the future of energy. What is the future of energy? If you are in the automobile business, the mandates coming from all of the manufacturers is that all of the cars in the next 5 years are going to be electric. That's a totally different economic model. I went to look at electric car and what were my options, and they told me that the maintenance cost is much cheaper, that my first service will be 2 years later. And I said, well, what would be the cost of that first service? And they said, well, really nothing. It will be an inspection of the undercarriage to ensure that there are no wear and tear or damages to the undercarriage. But the car will speak to the internet. The car will be online with the internet. And so any alerts, any troubles in the system, it will alert. And it may be as easy as a algorithm reprogramming or refresh on the vehicle. So if you're an automobile mechanic, there are very little mechanical parts in an electric vehicle. And most of the parts are a press and a release. So very little repairs to be done. So really and truly, when we look at the world that we live in, this is really a challenge to us. And the challenge is, are we doing the necessary research, the necessary work to understand how this future is going to impact our livelihood, our family, our businesses, and our countries? And that is the million-dollar question. So it requires a real deep introspection, because the entire world is at an inflection point. And that inflection point, I don't think anyone expected that when we had this session in April last year, that we would see a vaccination exercise for the entire globe. This is unprecedented. And for those of you who have not been familiar with the vaccine development, ostensibly, several of the vaccines that are making it and most popular, those are vaccines that were created using algorithms and programming. So for the first time, computer science was at the heart of producing a vaccine. And when it was produced using programming, it went into manufacturing and went straight into your arms. So from the computer to your arms. And the booster shots are going to be very much like that. And the reason why they're able to produce booster shots that quickly is because they are able to modulate the settings of the vaccines to be effective against the mutations. But all of that is being done using algorithms and programming and supercomputers. So we are at a unprecedented point in history. And the world that we know and the world that we existed in a year ago does not exist anymore. And I think the challenge is many people are so caught up with the issues and the fears of COVID-19 and the disruption of COVID-19 that they're not seeing the changes that are happening so rapid. And so when we emerge from this pandemic, we may be shocked. And you know the story, the emperor and his clothes. We may find out that the world has changed so drastic and we didn't see when it happened, and we are now caught out because we were not prepared for it.
Lots of information. Ian, I always tease you and call you the human Google, but certainly you've given us a lot to think about. So on that note, I see we have a couple questions in our Q&A, so I'm going to hand you over to Rennie.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Audra. Thank you so much again for the information that you shared. So our first question this morning has been submitted by an anonymous person. Good morning. I know it all begins with yourself. However, how do we cope with this pandemic when you feel like the future is not in your hands, as we are becoming anxious and scared of what will be in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer to that question, the relevance to the answer to that question is relative. What will work for you may not work for others. But I will share what has worked for me, and maybe that can help. And in collaboration and conversation with others, what works for us is to try and be normal, try and maintain communication, try and do the things that really matters. Family. I think some of the good that has come out of this pandemic, it has forced us to understand what is important. And it has forced us back home to spend time with family and to be with family, which is important. So, embrace the cooking at home, embrace the sharing of the meal. I saw a famous saying from was shared by someone with Pope Francis, who said, amazing, we want to come out of isolation. And what are we saying? That we really don't enjoy being at home. If you're at home, make home a palace, make home a restaurant, cook more, make home, somewhere where you can dance, where you can laugh, where you can enjoy and recreate your environment, recreate your surroundings. It's not easy looking at the news and seeing the news of how many new infections, how many deaths, the new variants and the disruption. But we are resilient. Humans are resilient. And I think you have to find what works for you. As I mentioned, what works for me may not work for you. I do a lot of planting in my garden. So I produce a lot of food at home, cassava, plantain, ginger, and it gives me no greater pleasure than going into my garden and reaping and cooking straight from my garden to the pot. I'm very happy about that. So it really is, you will have to try and understand how you can pivot and really find something that works for you in these times. Needless to say, it is really a difficult time. Business-wise, businesses have to adapt, and I know that's a word that is being bandied about, but you have to find a way to serve your customers in the circumstances. So you have to find a way to innovate. If you are in the business, how can you re-engineer the business to service customers? How can you recreate new business lines or new products or new services that will add value to your customers? And those are some of the questions that you have to ask yourself, not hoping and waiting that it may go back to normal, because it very may not go back to normal. Someone might disrupt your space and find that way, one of your competitors, and find that way to reach customers or recreate or re-augment products and services that existed before.
Thank you so much, Ian. I'm glad you mentioned the aspect about the business, because our next question is, for a business to effectively digitally transform in order to stay relevant, where should we start? And the top 3 things to be what are the top 3 things to be successful and stay relevant?
Yeah. So where does a business start? I can just tell you from all the discussions that I've had, and let me just share with you that I've been talking about the future of work for the last 5-6 years, and over the last 12 months, all of the CEOs and executives have come back and said, okay, we hear you now. We didn't think this was going to happen, but help us, right? And so let me just share with you, where do you start? You start with the customer, because your business exists to serve the customer. And that's where you want to start. That's where you always want to be. So you start with the customer on one end, and then you are going to look at your services or your products that you deliver to the customer. And are those services and products, are they still relevant given what is taking place? Are they still relevant to the customer? You also have to look at your competitors. You have to almost go back to school and look at some of these models, look at what the competitors are doing and what can you do to create a barrier that is going to be very difficult for the customer to augment by copying, right? So I give you an example. If you're in the supermarket business, yes, everybody wants online and everybody wants delivery. And that's not very difficult to replicate. That is very easy to replicate. It's not rocket science, right? But how can you stretch that to the point where it creates an experience that is very different from the competitor? Those are the questions that you have to ask. And when you talk about moving to digital, you're always talking about your processes. So how do you, and which part of your processes can you digitize? Which part of your processes can you digitize and can you automate? And if you can digitize and automate, is it going to be more effective, more efficient? Or is it going to create an output that the customer will not necessarily like? So for instance, you may have some customers who love the touchy feeling personal care. Or can you create an online app that allows you to do that? That allows a customer to be able to call the app and speak to someone in store. Or allow the customer to say, okay, I see you don't have these 4 other items that I want in stock. Can your app recommend alternatives that you have in store? We are out of this item, but we have these 3 other items. Would you like one of these? So in the process of digitization, it always is looking at the customer and how can you serve the customer, which aspect of the processes that you can adapt and make it digital by moving it to a system that is online. And when I say online, I mean ones and zeros. So can you automate it? And one of the good things about digitalization is that, think about the business. If it's manual, you typically have a number of hops before you get to the endpoint. So you may have 6 points that you have to work through to get it to the endpoint. Well, can you relook the processes so that now you can reduce those steps from 6 steps, and maybe with digitization, you might be able to get it to 2 steps. So in other words, you're becoming more efficient and you're also reducing costs, reducing complexity, and you're getting a faster time to the customer in that process as well. So customer, always your processes, which aspect of the business can we make digital? And then the other end of the spectrum is very, very key, because a business doesn't exist by itself. A business consists of people. So that's why we say people is at the core of every business. And you now have to look at digital. Do I have the skills? Do I have the skill sets? And if I don't, what skill sets do I need? What skills do I need? And can the team that I have, can I retool, reskill that team to be able to fit into the new mode of business? Those are really the main components that you want to look at. But the customer is always at the heart of it. And a good example is Jeff Bezos. You know, the world ranks him as Mr. Customer, because everything he does is to ensure that the customer experience is differentiated, second to none, and he's constantly improving that customer experience. And the reason why Amazon has grown leaps and bounds during the pandemic, obviously, is because immediately they were able to use the data that they have and redesign the business to scale and provide more online deliveries. In some instances, they're using the drones to deliver. And I want to point this out. In the midst of the pandemic, they added much more robotics and automation to the business. But Amazon also employed much more persons during that time. At one point in time, they hired 100,000 persons during the pandemic just to keep the factories, although they are automated, going. So at the core of digital transformation is people. And you have to understand which aspect can be digitized. And if it can be digitized efficiently, cost effectively, then digitize it. And then use the resources, human resources that you have to provide and to work in areas that are higher value, that requires empathy, that requires emotional intelligence, right? Customer care, for instance. And make sure that you don't have humans that are robots doing that, because we have some androids as well, right? They just don't have the personality for it. But I hope that is helpful. That's usually the 3 areas that we focus on when we are dealing with digital. So customer, processes, and the people.
Thanks so much, Ian. You mentioned digitization. We have our next question here. What is the difference between digitize and automate?
All right, so there are a couple of different words, right? So there's digitalization, right? And digitalization, I'm giving you that one, all you didn't ask. Digitalization deals with taking, as I mentioned, the manual processes and the manual systems you have. You know, you might be a paper-based organization, and how do you convert that into digital, into a process where it's now inputted into a system? So for instance, an example might be you produce quotations and you produce bills and you get your bills from your customers and it's paper-based. Well, you can say to your customer, well, I don't want paper-based bills from you anymore. I want you to send me electronic bills and I want you to integrate with my accounting system. So I'm receiving all of that electronically, and you've automated that process, and now you don't have all the filing, etc., that you need to do. And that's digitalization. When we talk about digital, we're talking about now transforming the business. Overall, the business is now operating as a digital business, which is to say that you have now gone through the process of digitization and you're now a digital business. So your systems, your work processes are now digital. And that is the process we talk about, digital transformation. So the transformation from moving from a paper-based, manual-based to digital, that process is called the transformation. And why is it a transformation? It's because literally the business model, the workflows, and the business processes have to be re-engineered. And in re-engineering, you're now redesigning the business so that it's no longer manual, it's now digital. Within that digital sequence, think about your HR, think about your operations. So you might have inventory, you might have purchasing, you might have sales, and you know, typically those systems sit within what you call an ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning System. And I don't want to get too technical, but they tend to be in siloed, right? They tend to be in silos. Those systems are typically separate systems. Automation basically now gets you to the point when you have now transformed the business and you have a digital business. You are now removing a lot of the steps that are siloed so that they are now automated within the digital system. So an example of that would be your procurement process. So the inventory, the sales module looks at the inventory and sees that the inventory has been reduced to what is the threshold, the minimum thresholds. And typically what you do, I'll just give you an example, in most businesses in Trinidad, what they do, or in the Caribbean, Latin America, what they do is they look at, the procurement manager will look at the inventory and say, okay, I think I want to buy 15 of this now, I think I want to buy 20 of this now. So in an automated business, sales, inventory, and purchasing, you've automated that process. The minute the inventory leaves and it's sold, an automatic purchase order is triggered to the supplier. And the supplier gets that purchase order, begins to ship. And so you know that you have what is called a just-in-time business. There's literally almost no human intervention during that process. That's an example of automation. Motors would be the same. You have 10,000 of a specific car on the road. You know that these parts are required in this quantity every 4 months. The lead time is 2 months. So your system looks at all of that data and says, oh, part is about to be sold out, and the lead time is 2 weeks. The system automatically generates an order and says, okay, Mr. Supplier out of Japan or wherever, ship to me these, and I need them by this time. Again, that's taking all of the guesswork out of it and taking the human error and taking the accountants having to sign off, because all of that automation would have been built into the process. And that's why I said it is always at the heart, the customer, and then the processes, the workflow, and then of course the employees in terms of what is their role now in the process of automation. So digitalization, digital, transformation, and all of that leads to automation. And then you get down into things like machine learning, and that really now talks about your system learning more about the changes, cyclical changes, seasonal changes. But those are all components within the Amazon ecosystem, which will give them an advantage and will give any competitor in any one of your businesses who've been able to digitize, it will give them an advantage over you as well. But that was a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you too, Ian, for the detailed response. We have time just for one more question. It would seem that our group is headed in the wrong direction. You spoke about automotive, you spoke about oil and gas. So are we being kind to the planet, or are we adding to things that we actually need to change?
Well, I don't know about heading in the wrong direction. I think in the essence, what's going to happen is we don't manufacture cars in Trinidad, in the Caribbean, anywhere in the Caribbean. You know, the companies that manufacturers and the owners of these brands, they've all mandated and they've all agreed that they will change to electric cars. Some of them have already agreed and are no longer producing electric cars, and vast majority have agreed that by 2025 they are no longer going to be producing fossil fuel for consumer cars, vehicles. So that is something that is going to happen. And by the way, we are not designers or architects or our own architects of what we do, because we import everything and we create nothing. We are takers, and we will be accepting what the world dishes out. And that's why this talk this morning is so important, because it's really an invitation for all of us to take responsibility for our world, take responsibility for our future, not leave it to the organization that we work with, or what I'm seeing sadly in many countries is people depending on the government for their futures. I think that's a sad case of affairs, and I think collectively we have to take responsibility. So more than anything from today's talk, I'm hoping that, you know, in the brief time, because this is usually a 3-hour lecture, I really hope in the brief time that we've had, you really take away that there's a lot of change that you have to make, and individually and collectively and as businesses, and in each one of the countries that we exist in, there's a responsibility that we have. Change is coming, whether or not we want it. It's unprecedented. It will be devastating for those who are not prepared, individually, organizationally, and also from a national level. It's going to be devastating to countries that are operating in industries that are the industries of the past. So again, a very good question, which provokes, and I really hope you take this back to your organization and start asking some of the tough questions. That is what MLI exists for, to really stir up the mind and get you thinking differently, get you thinking outside of the norm, and bringing about change, driving change, and transforming, you know, your world, what you're responsible for, be it at home, in the workplace, your community, wherever. So I can show the video now. I think I have the audio working, and I would love to see if we can, if that is okay.
We have an incredible opportunity to create entirely new sustainable industries, investing in nature as the true engine of our economy.
The current global crisis has disrupted every aspect of our lives, but it has also presented us with an extraordinary opportunity, a chance to reset and accelerate efforts to improve the state of our world.
Changing our current trajectory will require bold and imaginative action, together with determination and decisive leadership. In order to secure our future and to prosper, we need to evolve our economic model, putting people and planet at the heart of global value creation. If there is one critical lesson we have to learn from this crisis, we need to put nature at the heart of how we operate. We are on the verge of catalytic breakthroughs that will alter our view of what is possible and profitable within the framework of a sustainable future. We need nothing short of a paradigm shift, one that inspires action at revolutionary levels and pace. We simply cannot waste any more time. The only limit is our willingness to act. And the time to act is now.
So Ian, so thank you. I was just looking at the keywords at the end of the video: reimagine, redesign, rethink, reinvent, revolution, and reset. And as Ian said earlier, we all need to be futurists and understand the challenges happening in the future and how we can take meaningful action. Ian, on behalf of all of us from MLI, I'd like to thank you for sharing with us so powerfully and really encouraging us to think futuristically, to better prepare ourselves for the changes taking place all around us, and most importantly, to capitalize on the opportunities that are presented. We look forward to having you join us again in the near future. Certainly it will be less than a year. To you, our Massy family, thank you once again for joining us and for your support over the past year. We certainly could not have reached this far without your support, so we really want to thank you for that. To my MLI team, who always work tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event happen, and our team at PBS Technologies, formerly Massy Tech, who support us as well, we want to thank you. And we want everybody to remember that in the presentation, we saw that almost 50% of our employees will need to be reskilled by 2025. So to this end, we want to encourage you to please continue to look out for our webinars and programs, register, sign up, make use of all the resources that are also available, the free resources, to ensure that we all keep leveling up to be better prepared for this future that is unveiling before us. Thank you, everybody, for staying on this additional time. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Please continue to keep safe, and we wish you and your families well. Take care. Bye-bye.